Deploying Modern Java Applications, a guide to running Spring Boot 3 on AWS Lambda with Java 21. This podcast is brought to you by Business Compass LLC. We are an Amazon Web Services advanced consulting partner. We build and migrate workloads to Amazon Cloud. Our website is businesscompassllc.com. Our phone number is 973-638-2228. Our email address is contact@businesscompassllc.us. This podcast will explore the steps to deploy a Java 21 Spring Boot 3 application on AWS Lambda. We'll cover everything from setting up your environment to deploying and testing your application, ensuring you're well equipped to handle the entire process. Prerequisites for AWS Lambda deployment. Before diving into the deployment process, ensure you have the following prerequisites. AWS account. Access to an AWS account with sufficient permissions to create and manage Lambda functions. Java 21. Ensure you have Java 21 installed on your machine. Maven. Apache Maven is required to build and package your Spring Boot application. AWS CLI. The AWS Command Line Interface, CLI, is necessary for deploying and managing AWS resources. AWS SAN CLI. The Serverless Application Model, SAM, CLI simplifies building and deploying serverless applications. Access to AWS, Java 21, and Essential Tools Setup. AWS Access. Sign in to your AWS Management Console. Ensure your user account has the necessary permissions to deploy Lambda functions. Java 21 installation. Download and install Java 21 from Oracle's official website. Maven setup. Install Maven by following the instructions on the Maven website. AWS CLI installation. Install the AWS CLI by following the AWS documentation. AWS SALI installation. Install the AWS SAS CLI from the official documentation. Setting up the environment. After installing the necessary tools, configure your environment. AWS CLI configuration. Run AWS configure to set up your AWS credentials and default region. Java version check. Ensure Java 21 is correctly installed by running the Java version. Creating a Spring Boot 3 project. Now that the environment is set up, a new Spring Boot 3 project will be created. Generating a new Spring Boot project with Maven. Open your terminal and navigate to your working directory. Run the following Maven command to generate a new Spring Boot project. MVN archetype generate dgroup udroup equals com.example dartifact iid equals demo darchetype artifact id equals Maven archetype quick start d'interactive mode equals false. Navigate to the newly created project directory. cd demo. Open the pom.xml file and update it to include Spring Boot 3 dependencies, integrating AWS Lambda with Spring Boot. Adding AWS serverless Java container support. To run your Spring Boot application on AWS Lambda, you'll need to add the AWS Serverless Java Container dependency. Open the pom.xml file and add the following dependency. Dependency. Group idcom.amazonas.serverless/group id. Artifact AWS Serverless Java Container Spring Boot 3/artifact id. Version greater than 1.7.3/version. /dependency. Implementing the Lambda Handler class. Next, create a Lambda Handler class to handle incoming requests. Creating a Lambda Handler for Spring Boot applications. Create a new Java class in your project. For example, lambda handler.java. Implement the handler as follows. Import com.amazonas.serverless.proxy.spring.spring boot lambda container handler. Import com.amazonas.services.lambda.runtime.request stream handler. Public class Lambda handler implements request stream handler. Private static final Spring Boot Lambda container handler less than greater than handler. Static. Handler equals Spring Boot Lambda container handler.getOS proxy handler application.class. Add override. Public void handle request input stream output stream context throws IO exception. Handler.proxy stream output stream context. Designing API endpoints with controllers. With your Lambda handler set up, it's time to design your API endpoints. Defining microservices and endpoints in Spring Boot. Create a new controller class, for example, hellocontroller.java. Define your API endpoints. At REST controller. At request mapping, API public class hello controller. At get mapping /hello public string hello. Return hello, AWS Lambda with Spring Boot 3. Preparing for deployment with SAM. Next, prepare your application for deployment using AWS SAM. Initializing SAM and creating a template.yaml file. Run SAM init to create a new SAM project. Choose AWS Quick Start Templates and Java 8.11 as the runtime. Create a template.yaml file in the root of your project. AWS template format version, September 9, 2010. Transform, AWS, Serverless 2016 1031. Resources, My Spring Boot function. Type, AWS, Serverless : function. Properties. Handler, com.example.demo.lambda handler. Runtime, Java 11. Code URI, /target/demo 1.0, jar. Memory size, 512. Timeout, 30. Building and deploying the application. It's time to build and deploy your Spring Boot application to AWS Lambda. Compiling, packaging, and deploying to AWS Lambda. Run the maven build command to package your application. MVN clean package. Deploy the application using SAM. SAM deploy guided. Follow the prompts to configure your deployment. Testing and debugging the application. After deploying, test and debug your application to ensure everything works as expected. Verifying functionality and resolving common issues. Invoke the Lambda function. Use the AWS CLI or AWS console to invoke the function and check the logs for any issues. Debugging. If you encounter issues, review the CloudWatch logs and adjust your code or configuration as necessary. Cleaning up and next steps. Finally, clean up your AWS resources and explore further learning opportunities. Removing deployed applications and further learning opportunities. Remove resources. Run SAM delete to remove all deployed resources. Further learning. Explore additional topics like optimizing Lambda performance, integrating with other AWS services, or deploying a multifunction serverless application. This podcast provides a thorough understanding of deploying Java 21 Spring Boot 3 applications on AWS Lambda, enabling developers to build and deploy serverless applications effectively. Thank you for listening to our podcast. Please share this podcast, visit our website, and follow our social media links.